Minnie Otto stood over the shattered vase, her hands trembling, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. A mix of anger and trepidation churned in her stomach. This was the 10th time in 2 months. Each time the explanation was the same. Each time Jean insisted it wasn't him, but she knew better. Or at least she thought she did. Little Jean sat on the floor, his legs tucked beneath him, his fingers clenching the hem of his nightshirt. His wide blue eyes shimmered with unshed tears. But it was not fear she saw in them. It was something else, something deeper. "Jean," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "you have to tell me why you keep doing this." His lower lip trembled. "I didn't do it," he whispered. "Robert did." A sigh escaped her lips, sharp and exhausted. Thomas would be livid when he saw this. He was already at the end of his patience, and she was fast approaching hers. If only she could reason with Jean. If only she didn't have Robert to contend with. Robert and Jean were inseparable. They played together, ate together, even slept together. The doll wasn't just a toy to Jean. He was something more. Something sacred. To Jean, Robert wasn't a plaything. He was a brother, a protector, a part of him that could not be severed. Heaven forbid she or Thomas mention that Robert was just a doll. Minnie had once found it charming, the way Jean doted on Robert. When he had insisted Robert needed his own room, she had humored him, helping him set up a miniature bedroom in the attic, complete with a bed, furniture, even a stuffed bear for Robert to cuddle when Jean was away. But what had once been a sweet childhood attachment had twisted into something unsettling. One evening she had passed by Jean's room and heard him speaking in hushed tones. A pause. Then another voice. Deep, gruff, alien. She froze in the hallway, the candle in her hand flickering. Her heart pounded. Swallowing hard, she pushed open the door. Jean sat cross-legged on the floor, Robert perched in front of him. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jean looked up, his expression calm, as if she had interrupted nothing more than an ordinary game. "Robert," he said simply. "He was telling me a story." Her skin prickled. She had to be imagining things. There was no one else in the room, of course. Just Jean, just Robert, just her own mind playing tricks on her. But then things began to change. A few nights later, a crash echoed through the house. Minnie rushed to Jean's room and found him sobbing. His toys broken, pieces of porcelain and wood scattered across the floor like the remains of a violent storm. "What happened?" she gasped, kneeling beside him. Jean wiped his eyes. "Robert did it." Her breath caught. Anger surged up, bitter and hot. "Jean, don't lie." "I'm not lying," he whimpered. "Robert got mad. He didn't like me playing with other toys." A chill crawled up her spine. She shook her head, forcing down the uneasy feeling twisting inside her. Then came the footsteps. Late at night, laughter drifting through the halls, the sound of tiny feet scurrying across the floorboards. Each time she and Thomas checked Jean's room, they found him fast asleep, his arms curled around Robert. Thomas was beyond furious. He believed none of it. The broken items, the noises, the ridiculous notion that a doll was to blame. One night, after another shattered lamp and another tearful denial, he grabbed Jean by the shoulders and shook him. "Enough," he roared. "This nonsense ends now." That night they were jolted awake by a loud slam. The bedroom door had been thrown open with such force that the walls trembled. Minnie's breath caught as her gaze landed on the chair in the corner. Robert sat there, his beady black eyes fixed on them, his tiny arms resting on his lap. He looked as he always did, and yet, Minnie swore his grin had widened. From that moment on, the house was thick with tension. Thomas refused to entertain any further foolishness. He made a decision. Jean would be sent away to boarding school. The thought of losing her son shattered her, but she feared what might happen if he stayed. When they told Jean over dinner, he was silent. Then, hours later, the vase broke. Minnie stormed up the stairs, ready to reprimand him. But before she reached his room, a sharp cry rang out. She burst in to find chaos, furniture overturned, pictures strewn across the floor, Jean cowering beneath his blankets, his small body trembling, and Robert sitting in the corner, watching. Something inside her snapped. Enough was enough. She marched across the room and grabbed Robert, her fingers digging into his fabric body. Jean let out a panicked wail. "What are you doing?" he cried, scrambling out of bed. "Putting Robert away," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm locking him in the attic." Jean threw himself at her, clutching her dress, sobbing, begging. She pushed past him, heart pounding, her grip on the doll tightening. For a moment, she had the insane urge to rip him apart, limb by limb, to destroy him entirely. But she didn't. "This is for your own good," she whispered. Thomas stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed. He said nothing as she marched past. She flung open the attic door, tossed Robert inside, and locked it. That night, the knocking started. Steady. Unrelenting. As if something was trying to get out. Thomas dismissed it as Jean attempting to rescue the doll. But Minnie lay, awake, staring at the ceiling, listening, her body rigid with dread. The next morning, Thomas took Jean away. Minnie stayed behind, watching as they disappeared down the road. She turned back into the house, her heart aching. Then she heard it. Footsteps, pacing above her. Slow, deliberate. Her blood ran cold. And then, laughter. It echoed through the house, light and taunting, unmistakably real. Robert was waiting,